This podcast is rated E for explicit. As we continue exploring the topic of toxic masculinity, this is actor Justin Baldini on what we should really be teaching our children.
Who I am in my core, in conflict with who the world tells me as a man I should be. But I don't have a desire to fit into the current broken definition of masculinity, because I don't just want to be a good man. I want to be a good human. And I believe the only way that can happen is if men learn to not only embrace the qualities that we were told are feminine in ourselves, but to be willing to stand up, to champion and learn from the women who embody them.
You met me in the midst of many things. Shedding skin, sprout wings, looking at life as a spiritual being through a human lens, having conversations with God about so many things. This show is your invitation. The poet God is the conversation. Today, I'm continuing the Men 2 series with the second half of my conversation with Aman, a member of the board. We both listened to a very memorable episode of Hidden Brain called The Lonely American Man, where psychologist Nobi Way talks about why boys have such trouble maintaining close bonds with each other.
The reason for that struggle really is quite simple, which is that it's American masculinity and masculine norms and masculine expectations that make close friendships into a girly gay thing rather than simply a human thing. So as boys grow older and enter manhood, they begin to be overwhelmed with this expectation that somehow they have to be, on their own. They can't depend on others. They have to be fully independent. That somehow the desire for intimacy with other boys is problematic in a culture that's very hypermasculine.
This hypermasculinity, boys pick it up quickly and unconsciously. There's one comment that Niobe can't forget.
It might be nice to be a girl because I wouldn't have to be so emotionless.
That one quote just captured so many of the boys I've spoken with.
Even parents buy into the idea that there's something to be concerned about if their teenage boys appear sensitive and vulnerable.
I think parents sometimes even get anxious when their boys sound like this. So even when, you hear parents talking about their kids being very sensitive, it's oftentimes with their sons, there's oftentimes an embarrassment about it. And parents certainly aren't, judging their sons in the same ways, but parents are part of the culture just like everybody else.
Niobe has had parents come to her and say,
I think my son is gay. And I'll say, oh, okay, so, what makes you think that? And they'll say, well, he's very sensitive. And, that to me is as depressing as the comment about it might be nice to be a girl. Because then, you wouldn't have to be emotionless. Because the idea is that, first of all, of course, being gay is as joyous, as wonderful as being straight. But, the fact that they're equating sexuality with being sensitive, it has nothing to do with sexuality.
So we all have what Dr. Phil likes to call life-defining moments. They normally occur around events that shape us in some way. Just over 2 decades ago, I was sitting at the kitchen table in my aunt's house in Killeen, Texas, surrounded by her ex-husband, their kids, and my mother, who unknowingly to me had some concerns about my sexuality. We pick up the conversation with Aman, where I explain to him what happened when my mother decided to make that topic breakfast table conversation. Well, let the humiliation begin in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. My mom decided that she wanted to ask my aunt's ex-husband something along the lines of, am I, meaning me, okay? And this was a conversation that they were having at the table, and everybody was there.
About you.
Right, about me, right? And
yeah.
basically, it was something along the lines of, she said, I forgot what her words were verbatim, but it was something like, you know, I worry about him sometimes. You know, is he masculine enough? She didn't specifically say, I'm wondering if he's gay or not, but she kind of alluded to that.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting there, and it's kind of one of those things where you're kind of having a humiliating experience like that,
right? Where
you go inside yourself, and you're just almost like you're behind a window looking out through your own eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember looking at him to see what his answer would be.
Right.
And he's sitting across from the table. He has this kind of like smug look on his face. And then he's like, I mean, I think he's okay. I think he's okay. I think he's kind of, you know, like, I think he's masculine enough. I mean, you know,
right.
That kind of thing. And I'm just kind of sitting there, and maybe I don't recall if I was thinking this in the moment, but I remember after that, especially observing how the kind of man that he was,
right,
and the kind of things that he exposed me to while living in that house. And I was thinking to myself, did she have any fucking idea what she was asking, who she was asking that question to, and what kind of man he was? Because essentially, you're asking this man to measure my masculinity with his idea of what masculinity is. And I was so angry about that. And that's just kind of one of those life-defining moments.
For sure.
That kind of stuck with me throughout the years. And I
think one of the things you just said kind of struck me, because it's something that, as I've talked about, I'll go to high schools and talk to kids from time to time. And, you know, one of the things that you recognize, especially with younger people, but then also as we are adults, like one of the biggest fears we have, whether we want to admit it or not, is the fear of embarrassment.
Right.
It's that fear of, you know, somebody exposing something about us that can kind of create that embarrassing moment. And again, that's such... I'm not able to kind of truly define what that means necessarily during this particular episode, but I think it's important to think through that and also to understand, like, you know, is it fair to try to define somebody and say and question somebody's quote unquote masculinity or whatever it may be, right?
Right.
What you're doing is you're questioning their identity, and what you're saying is this person's identity is not what I expected it to be or what I wanted it to be. And as a parent or as a family members, as the older kind of influencers in a young person's life, that's a very dangerous thing. I mean, you remember this as if it was yesterday.
Yeah.
And you can probably remember exactly where you were sitting at the table, what your uncle was wearing, what you know, the tone and the people's voices, the cadence of the people's voices. And, you know, a lot of people would define that as a traumatic experience.
Right.
And at the time, your parents or your mother may have been thinking that I need to do this and need to ask this in this way in front of these people because I need Akil to become what I want him to be. And the best way for me to do this, at least at that time, may have been through that approach. Whereas what she didn't recognize at the time, and maybe still doesn't now, I don't know, is that approach had the exact opposite of what her goal was, which was to actually push you deeper into a hole of, am I who I'm supposed to be? And should I have these feelings, or should I try to hide or become more masculine or less masculine or whatever it may be? When the reality is what you need to be doing in kind of helping younger people understand is, you need to find those things that you're passionate about. You need to find those identities that you most align yourself with, and kind of grow them. It doesn't matter if they take you whether it takes you in one area where society deems you worthy or deems you these predefined notions of what a young black man is supposed to be, or a young man, young woman. Again, this applies to all of us. It's not just as simple as I'm going to like kind of cookie cut this part of society and only look at it through one microscope. Like, it affects everybody, because what it does also for you is it affects the other people that you're going to interact with throughout your life. And not only in the sense of like how you feel about those interactions, but also in the sense of how they feel about those interactions. Right. Which is something that, I think as much as we say we are in tune and we're considerate and we understand other people's experiences, a lot of times we don't take those into account when we're having these kind of meaningful conversations. I think, one of the things you talked about before is like, going through that time right before you wrote that podcast, right? And kind of recognizing, okay, like, I don't even want to talk about this with myself, but I probably need to talk about it with somebody. All right, well, who is worthy enough, or who can I trust enough to have this conversation? And a lot of times, the people that you would think you can trust to have this conversation, and as much as they want to have good intentions, they are so caught up in their own definitions of how you should do it based on how they would internally deal with it. Right. So if it's something that they recognize as, this isn't something that I really, in my personal life, bothers me, right? Like, an example would be the sound of styrofoam breaking, right? Like, some people can't stand the sound of styrofoam breaking, or I have plenty of female friends that hate the word moist. So, really? So just because I don't necessarily hate the word moist doesn't mean that I should tell my female friends that can't, like, literally cringe at the sound of it, that they are wrong, or you need to just get over that, it's something that I have to sit and digest and say, okay, I understand that. If you don't want to go into the why you hate it so much, honestly, that doesn't matter to me. I just need to be aware of that, and I need to be able to react to that and not just say to them, okay, just get over it, right? No, I mean, that's abusive. It's abusive. It's abusive, and it's extremely assumptive. And what you're also doing is you are projecting your own experience and your own touch points when it comes to what bothers you really a lot and what doesn't bother you a lot, and you're projecting that onto the other person instead of just listening and consuming what they're saying to you and digesting it and then coming back with something. I see it all the time. I recognize this very clearly in people. When you're talking to them and you're talking about something in depth, you can see the wheels turning, that they're already starting to think about what they're going to say instead of just listening to you. And that's something that I think, as much as I have great friends and we all have great relationships and acquaintances, I think as you get older, it becomes even harder for you to turn those wheels off for a minute, especially when it's a topic where in your own personal life, it doesn't affect you. So I like the moist thing, right? It doesn't, I've said moist like 17 times in the last few seconds. And who knows, somebody may have turned this off because of it.
And on that note, we'll be right back after these messages. But let's let Aman finish his point first.
Around certain people, I can't use that word. It's a trigger word, and whether it bothers me, it doesn't matter. If it bothers them, I need to be aware of that. I need to react to that, and whether or not they're willing or ready to address what truly bothers them about that or make a change about it, I just need to sit back and say, okay, and accept that, and be a good friend and be supportive of the fact that they hate that word.
I am so excited to be a part of the wonderful world of podcasts, and to celebrate, I'm giving away a copy of my book, Lies I Never Quite Believed, which averages 5 stars on Amazon and iBooks. Now, a drawing will be held after each episode of Season 1. All you have to do to enter is subscribe, rate, and review this podcast on whatever platform you happen to be listening on. And then send me a screenshot at poetgodmail@gmail.com. That's poetgodmail godmail@gmail.com. This giveaway is only eligible for listeners living in the United States of America. If you could find a way to step into the experience of what that is for the other person, then you can then it helps you be more empathetic, right? You know, if you can find a way to do that. And thinking about being back at that breakfast table, it's something. I don't hold my mother responsible for the experience in the way that I used to, because I understand that she could only give me what she was given in terms of, how she was raised and how she was thought to communicate, and the skills of which that she had and she had developed, and what she thought and was taught to think that was okay, and that's fine. I think she did the best that she could. But stepping back from it, it would have been a far different, maybe a little less painful experience if she was able to articulate what she was saying from her heart instead of from her fears.
Right.
Because when you are speaking from a place of fear, that's all the other person on the other side of it is just going to experience the pain of that. But they don't see that, on what she probably really wanted to say was, oh my God, I think he's gay, and I think that I don't want him to suffer what I think that experience might be like, or whatever the case is.
Right.
And I don't want him to. I want him to be happy and all this other things, and that would have been something that would have been more from her heart.
Right.
I may not have been able to receive it on that level at that time, but I think in retrospect, it might have felt different to be able to articulate those words, and that experience also informs the way I try to communicate with people today, and the way that I allow them to communicate with me in terms of what's acceptable or not. And like you were talking about, when it comes to different things that friends may say in conversation and stuff like that, because there are a lot of things that you have, conversations that you have with friends, and they say certain things, and as they're saying it, that if somebody else was listening to this conversation outside, they may be very offended.
Right.
But you don't particularly judge them from that level because you know their heart. Right. And I kind of had a situation like that where, a friend of mine was telling me about an experience with somebody else, and he was kind of articulating some things that he was displeased about. But in his articulation of his feelings, he was saying some things that just really wasn't correct. And I thought about whether or not I should address it with him, or if I should just let it be. And I slept on it. And then the other day, I said, I have to address it.
Right.
Because it would be irresponsible of me to know better. And also, it would be irresponsible of me to deny myself what I was feeling as a result of listening to that. And so I decided, that just because I know your heart as a friend doesn't mean you get to be irresponsible in the way that you articulate something, or in the way that you that you may be abusive in the way that you're speaking. It might not be directed towards me. But if I share a similar experience to the person that you might be talking about, then indirectly it is abusive to me.
Yeah.
And so I just am not as willing anymore to allow certain things to pass. And what I say to myself about it is like, no, I'm sorry, I cannot give you that. Right. Yeah. I cannot give you that I can't pacify you.
Right.
You know, it doesn't mean that I don't love you, but I can't allow you to have it. And the whole experience of programming this podcast, I think about that a lot. I think about a lot of these things that over the years that I've allowed people to get away with.
Right.
I've had to pay the price for it. It wasn't free. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm the one who had to sit with whatever trauma it caused me or whatever, sadness. And I remember in thinking about that, I was thinking about one of the things that Maya Angelou talks about when it comes to these types of things and some of her work. And I don't remember it word for word, but I remember her using this kind of analogy that when things like this happen, it's almost like kind of putting just a little crack, so to speak, in your heart. May not break it,
right?
But it's just a little blemish, you know? And then that adds up over and over and over and over again.
Yep.
And you keep allowing people to get away, you know, with these little quote unquote offenses, you know, unaddressed, dismissed, you know,
right.
And then you wonder why at the end of the day, you know, after all this time has passed, that you're pissed the fuck off.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
You
and
know?
I think, you know, a lot of things that I kind of listened to throughout that piece of it. First of all, it takes an incredible amount of strength to recognize as an older person that moment that happened at that table, and instead of kind of having this resentment and animosity towards your mother, recognizing that there were things that she experienced growing up that led her to this moment.
Right.
That whether she knew it or not, by approaching it this way, it was it was creating a lot of pain and hurt for you. Yet you take a step back and say, you know what, I understand those different factors that got her to this point. That's one piece of it. However, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't necessarily think, not only in that particular example, but then the other examples you're talking about, just because you understand what got them to that point doesn't absolve them of responsibility completely.
That's true.
And what you're talking about as far as kind of letting these little things pass, not only are they detrimental to your overall friendship with that person, and not only is it causing you as an individual pain, it also extrapolates to how they interact with all people that aren't their friends. And if they're willing and not understanding that they're causing this pain with someone that they call and would say to the outward world that this is my friend.
Right.
What does that mean for the people that are not their friends, that are strangers?
Right.
And if just because they may not have full interactions with those people, you better believe those little statements or those things that are kind of happening are also affecting the overall world around them. Yeah. And it's important to, I think one of the things that we tend to kind of wrap our minds around when it comes to these harder, tougher conversations about people's realities, how they got to those realities, and those things that they may say that are offensive to people that didn't have the same experiences that they did growing up, whether that's innate or whether that's, just part of the overall environments that they were in. Right. It isn't necessarily about getting them to agree that they're wrong or getting them to say like, I messed up or I did this or I did that. What it's about, honestly, is just getting them to recognize that there is another perspective about it. Right. And that perspective should be treated with respect, whether or not you agree with it. It's having that true understanding that these words and these experiences can hurt people, just like in the microcosm of the moist thing. Like, it still hurts that person. Right. It doesn't to the extent of the topics that we're talking about. These topics carry much more weight, much more pain with them because of all the experiences that we've had growing up or listening to other people's experiences. And it is important to no longer just sit back and say, oh, it's not a big deal, like, that's just how he or she was raised, or, I know that their dad or mother was this particular way, or they grew up in East Bumfuck, Alabama, and they never had exposures to these things.
Right.
But, you know, there's a reason they're friends with you. You know, there's a reason why, you know, you've been able to spend the time with them, because you recognize that there's value within that friendship beyond just, you know, this person may be able to help me with XYZ,
right.
you know, help me save money or whatever it may be. Like, you've had good quality interactions with them. And because of that, yes, you should be holding them to a higher standard. And yes, you should be, when those times come, you know, definitely addressing them. And sometimes I think a perfect thing that you said in that story, in that experience was, you know, I slept on it. You know, I didn't just immediately jump, boom, and like hit them back, like kind of clap back, right? Because the last thing you want to do is in what I would consider a quote unquote teachable moment. And it's teachable for everybody. It's not just one way. Right. You don't want that moment to disintegrate into something else, because there are very strong emotions and kind of this background denial, or this background guilt into feeling like, well, you know, why should I feel guilty about feeling the certain way? This is all I've ever known and all I've ever been raised to feel. And the reality is, no, you shouldn't feel guilty about it. That's not the purpose of this conversation.
Absolutely.
The purpose of this conversation is to consume and understand that what you say and what you do can affect other people. And the more you understand that, the less opportunities that you'll just kind of turn a blind eye to that and say things and do things that alienate people and make them feel discredited, or make them feel dehumanized or marginalized. That's the really word. That's the word that it is. It's
absolutely.
You're creating a situation where you're marginalizing somebody else's experience, whether you believe it or not,
right,
or are even conscious of it. And then when you're challenged on that, you're like, wait a minute, I don't believe that. I don't feel that. And these are the XYZ reasons why. And they're not necessarily listening and really trying to unravel, how did Akil get to that point of, man, I really hurt him. He must have misunderstood me. He didn't hear me right.
Right.
You know, I didn't mean that. Like, it's okay. It's not a terrible thing. Like, we're not, again, humans are flawed. We're not perfect. Even when we're friends, we don't always see eye to eye on things, and that's not a bad thing.
That's not a bad thing.
You know, you're able to kind of get to I think some of the best arguments I've had with my friends that, you know, have complete different core values than me, is getting to that point where it's, okay, we agree to disagree. Right. And it doesn't mean that we will never talk about this again. It doesn't mean that we hold animosity towards each other because of it. It just means that we agree to disagree, and we were able to listen to each other's perspective, so that hopefully in the future, however fucked up it was, right, in our own eyes, right, that in the future we do feel safer to be able to talk about it, and talking about it in a much deeper sense, because we don't want to continue to have just surface level conversations. I know I don't. I'm a how and why person. I'm not a who, what, where, and when person.
Right.
We'll be right back after these messages.
Hey guys, I'm Joseph, a member of the board, which is what Akil refers to as his community of friends and supporters.
We all have something valuable to give, and sometimes it's as simple as giving someone else a reason to live.
On behalf of all the board members, I want to thank you for listening to our podcast. Akil's success is our success, and we want you to be a part of the community we are building.
It's not enough. It's not enough.
Because you are the very foundation we must build it on.
It's not enough to tell people that they matter. We have to show them. Like my friends showed me.
So tell a friend, leave a review, and keep in touch. We want to hear from you, because it all matters. Just as you do.
care so much about trying to get people to agree with my perspective on any particular thing. My thing is this. This is my thing.
Go ahead. Sorry.
When you start to try to speak with a level of authority on someone else's experience as a human being, that pisses me the fuck off.
Me too.
And there is no excuse, absolutely none, in this day and age where you can pick up your phone, you can pick up your iPad, you can pick up your computer and watch, read, listen to a multitude of different things or experiences on any particular subject that you do not understand.
Right.
But to say that you don't understand it or you don't know about it and you want to speak about it and be dismissive of what someone who does understand or who is living it, that's not acceptable.
Yeah. And
I just, whenever I kind of come across that with friends or whomever, I'm not going to allow that to pass. And I just think that, you know, if you want to be a better human being at the end of the day, if you want to be part of the solution instead of the problem, if you want to be effective in being understanding and listening with an informed ear, then you do the work, you go and do the research, you go and listen, you go and watch, however it is you need to do it. But to be ignorant, just completely, that's just not acceptable. And a lot of times, you know, when I do feel inspired to speak to a friend after having slept on something the next day and just say, listen, we need to have this conversation, that's where pretty much I'm coming from. I don't care if you don't particularly agree with me, but if you're going to disagree, you need to be informed with what you're disagreeing about.
Right.
You know, at least
right.
be informed about it.
Right.
Because I'm not, you know, it's kind of like a waste of the other person's time to even have a conversation with you that you haven't at least done the due diligence of to try to be, you know, to have some level of knowledge on.
Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, one of the biggest pieces about this entire conversation is it started off, you know, in a lot of ways talking about masculinity within men, right?
Right.
But what you recognize as, you know, we listen to the playback of this is that it doesn't live in a vacuum.
Right.
And it's affecting all aspects of our everyday lives. And to your point, like, to try to speak on something that you don't necessarily understand or you're not completely informed about, and it isn't like an attack on you to not be informed. Sorry, I can't tell you what it's like to be a woman. I accept that. You know, like,
right.
Am I going to sit here and try to say that a woman should do this or a woman should do that when I've never experienced being a woman? Of course not.
Right.
I can talk about my experience talking to women and hearing what they think about it, what it's like to be a woman. But at no point am I going to become a subject matter expert on women.
Right.
I mean, I'll do everything that I can when it comes to what I mean by that is a subject matter on the woman's experience.
Right.
I can do it in every, you know, I can go do women's studies in college. I can go on a retreat with only women I can go on a sabbatical for 5 years.
Right.
But it's not going to make me a woman ever.
Right.
So, you know, is I think also accepting that fact that yes, I can become informed, but at a certain point, like, I'll never experience that.
Yeah, because you at the end of the day, you can't walk in those shoes.
No.
You know?
And
you'll never know what it's like to push out a child.
No. No.
Thankfully, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I would say thankfully for me, yeah.
Right. You know?
So, yeah, no, I think that's also a tough part about some of these, you know, harder conversations to have with people, because they do get defensive, they do get dismissive, and it isn't because I'm trying to force an experience onto them. It's because I just want them to understand that this experience is real, and it's not to be marginalized, it's not to be dismissed, and it's not to be, it's not something that you can just kind of take ownership of and say that I'm wrong for feeling a certain way, when there's no opportunity for you to truly understand it.
Right.
But that doesn't mean you shouldn't try. Like, to your point, there are opportunities to read about it, to understand it within, this incredible technology that we have at the edge of our fingers.
Right.
Being able to Google all types of sources, being able to see videos, everything that you can possibly, documentaries, everything that you can possibly get your hands on. But at the end of the day, I'm not going to hold you to my experience because it's mine and mine alone. Obviously, as a black man, I can talk to another black man and say, hey, I can recognize that you may have similar experiences to me.
Right.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that I expect you to still have those same understandings that I have when it comes to my own experience. Like, it's still an individual thing. And so I think, for people to try to, get really defensive about it, it kind of takes away from the fact that, hey, it's okay. Like, you don't have to know everything about this. You just have to recognize that it's real and it's not less than yours.
I feel like people use that as an excuse for when they just don't want to listen.
Yeah.
And that thread of truth about just trying to get as close to that person's human experience as possible so that you could understand it, providing that's your intention and that's what you really want to do. That goes as regardless of whether you're talking to a police officer who you're asking to understand what it's like to be pulled over by a white man, wearing
any police,
right, and what that might be like in this day and age, considering the news and whatnot and all that, understanding that and maybe approaching the situation a little different, and consequently, what it might be for a police officer, any police officer, specifically a white police officer, and you're that black guy sitting in that car, what it might be like for that officer who has no intention of being harmful to you. He's just doing his job, and him thinking about what you might think. So there's always two sides to that coin.
Right.
But respecting that other person's experience of the situation is important in how you approach it, and it changes the energy in which and where you come from.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's just simply, at the end of the day, you're acknowledging that this is another human being.
Yeah.
And their experience of this life, of this world, and whatever happens to us within it is their truth.
Right. It's defined within, not from without.
Yes.
And especially not defined by you trying to kind of hijack that experience and telling somebody that it isn't as they perceive it to be. Right. That's the biggest mistake you can possibly do. And it'll create a situation where the person who you are talking to will shut down and truly not consume anything else you have to say beyond that.
Absolutely.
What are we teaching ourselves with these ideas we've been given? Toxic masculinity so deeply informs how we are living. What are we saying when we cause others pain? How do we frame someone else's existence to marginalize and dismiss their insistence that they are not who or what you think? And your failure to listen will sever the link to what can be learned and understood. But you choose to let bad news keep you from the good. How about we do something different instead? Embrace what is loving and erase the hate we were fed. There's no excuse for ignorance in this day and age. Maybe give your children something to help them turn the page.
Instead of teaching our children to be brave boys or pretty girls, can we maybe just teach them how to be good humans?
I'm Akil Johnson, the Poet God. Thank you for listening.